All right, so yes, so welcome again. And so we'll be going to hosting a static website. Okay, and as I mentioned, right, what we are looking to do is to have a lot of these hands-on skills. Okay, so it's more like we are doing it together. Okay, so I mean, if you don't have a GitHub account, for example, maybe you can just register one as we get started. It'll be good to maybe put a few things together there as we go along. All right. Now for the Azure and then the AWS, I think you can have that done later because that'll require you to now have a credit card. Okay, so you don't have to really stress for that now, even though they'll not necessarily charge that, but you can look at that at a later time. Okay. And in addition to that, please, if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to ask, and then I'll see how I can be able to answer that as well. And at the end of the session, I'll have my email across, and I'll share my Twitter handle as well. You could reach out if there's anything you want some clarification on, or some questions that you'd be wanting to ask. Okay. Now, this is practical, okay, but I just want to run through a few things to give us an understanding of what we are going to do, and then we can get into the demos. Okay, that's primarily what we are here for, right? Now, a bit about myself. So my name is Emmanuel Mingle, and I'm a lead trainer with Ghana Code Club. And Ghana Code Club is looking at training the young people in skills, computing skills, and then all things technology. So website development, robotics, that whole sort of an approach. So we tend to train the kids in that aspect as well. And yeah, so that's primarily what I do. And in addition, I'm actually a software developer. My key areas of interest is cloud security, and then security in general, and then some aspects of software development also. Okay, so primarily you could call me for cloud security and then software development related issues. All right. Okay. Going on. So these are more like the key areas we'll be looking at. Okay, not so much to look at there, but we'll get deep into that when we get to the demos. Okay, but primarily what we'll be looking at will be the, as I said, hosting websites on a static website. Okay, hosting a static website on these platforms. Okay, free platforms that are available to us. So first off, I just want to clarify that in terms of what we mean by hosting, when you're hosting a website, and then when you're registering a domain for that particular website. Okay, so that will be one of the first things you're going to look at. And then we'll look at, in terms of hosting, right? So paid hosting, free hosting, what's the difference that we have in there, okay? And then we'll dive deep into some free options available in terms of hosting. So, I mean, generally with GitHub pages, AWS, and then Azure, that could be considered free to some extent, all right? But yeah, so we'll look at those as well. And then we'll finally dive into the demo where we look at GitHub pages, we'll look at AWS, we'll look at Azure, okay? And then we'll probably move on from there, all right? And let me just reiterate. So if you have a GitHub account, or if you don't have a GitHub account, you can probably go ahead and then create that. Just head on to github.com. That'll be very much good for us to practice together at some point, all right? And so I'll just share that in the chat as well. github.com, you can just create a quick account from there. And then once we start off with the demo, it'll be good for you to follow along as well, okay? All right, so let's get started. And we want to talk on the hosting and then domain registration, right? What exactly is the difference in there? Now, typical example when it comes to hosting and then domain registration is, let's say you're in your house, and then you want a package delivered to you, or from your house to some other place, right? Now, the package and then where the package is located before it's now delivered to a third party, right? So just imagine something like that. Now, on the internet, we have a lot of things that we are able to see. So you have your website, there are some images there, there are some HTML files, there are some CSS files, and then all of those things. Now, where can I place these files? Where can I place these materials so that it can be accessed on the internet? Okay. Now, if I place them there in these particular locations, if it's in my house, right? How do I make sure that people can identify my house? What Would I put a name to my house, or would I give a location to my house that people can access, right? And how readable is that particular location? Okay, so that form of concept comes in terms of the hosting and then the domain. Okay, now, so hosting is what you storing these web resources for your website. So the resources could be, let's say, a database. It could be your plain simple PHP files. Let's say you're working with Python, you're working with Ruby, whatever file that you're using. Now you need a place to store these particular files so that you can access them. And if you are storing them, you are using, let's say, a specialized web server. So if you are using a server for PHP, or you have a server that's configured in tune with, let's say, to host a database, right? Or you can have a server that's configured for tuning. Okay, so now you put all the resources there, and then anyone on the internet can be able to access that. Okay, so that's hosting. So you are putting the resources there, they are available there, and then anyone can access that. Now that's what you talk about, you hosting the files. Now, if you go ahead, you have the domain name registration. So when you store files on the internet, the ideal thing that happens is that it probably might generate an IP address, okay, for that particular file. So if you go to, let's say, google.com, for example, right? You go to google.com. Now, behind the scenes, right, it now goes to fetch the files from that particular resource, okay? And it uses an IP address. Now, if I tell you to remember an IP address, for example, it will be difficult for you to keep track of all of these IP addresses, for example. So there are thousands of IP addresses. And so let's say you want to go to Facebook, you have to remember the IP address for Facebook. You have to remember the IP address for, let's say, LinkedIn or something else, right? Now, how do you make that simple? And that's where the domain name registration comes to play. So you now give a name that is suitable, that is easier for you to work with, easier for you to identify, and then easier for you to relate with as you go along. Okay, so that's with the domain name registration. Okay, now for most of the time, if you approach a company that you want to host a website, right, they actually provide both the hosting services and then the domain name services, right? But it's not primarily the same thing. Okay, now what we are doing, we'll just be hosting the website, and these platforms automatically generate a form of a domain name for us to use. Okay, now that's more like a subdomain. So GitHub will just give you a domain as part of everything that they have, like with the github.com. So you see sites like, let's say, Ghana.wordpress.com, something.00webhost, all of those things. Now, those are domain names, but those are more like improvised ones available to people. And then you can now get your own custom domain tuned towards your name or whatever brand that you are working towards. All right. Now, I know that for a lot of us, let's say with these skills that we are building up, right? Maybe we might want to get into some entrepreneurship. We might want to set up some form of put our skills across and all of those things, right? So you might need a place to host these sites. We might need a place to now, we might want to think about having our own domain names and all of these things, right? So there's more like a great place to start where we can host those, right? And then maybe we can add on to the domain names when we have, like, let's say, some much exposure or some much, how do you call it? Runway to actually get our own domain name or something like that, all right? Okay, so that's for the hosting and then the domain name, okay? But we'll be focusing primarily on the hosting aspects of things as we go along, all right? Okay, so now to the second point that we are tackling for what we are doing, that's in terms of the hosting. So with the hosting, you can have either paid or free. Okay, now, as the name suggests, it's pretty much easy to understand. So if you have a free, let's say, hosting website, or you're hosting a website for free, that's understandable what it would entail, right? And then if you have a paid version, it's also understandable what it would entail, okay? So paid hosting, it means that you are paying for those particular services. Now, of course, the advantage is that what you get for a paid service will not be necessarily what you get for a free service. Okay, so if you pay for that, you're able to now get larger aspects to store your file. So don't forget, we are talking about hosting, right? So let's say if your website files are, let's say, about 10 gigabytes or something, maybe a free hosting site will give you just 2 gigabytes of storage, right? But if you now come back to the aspects of paid storage, it's now possible to now extend, okay, let's say I want 15 gigabytes and I'm ready to pay for that. So that's what you talk about with the paid services, right? So added benefits, maybe you might have your own location to save those files. You don't have to share that with other people or something else like that, right? And then the free hosting, you don't really necessarily pay for that. So there are two things. So you might not necessarily pay for that, or you might pay for it after some time. So let's say you might get a service for 3 months free, and then after the 3 months, you get to pay for that. So let's say you have 1 year free, and then you get to pay for that. Now, with the options that we are looking at, primarily with GitHub Pages, for example, you can actually get to use it for the longest time that you want to do. Now, with Azure and then the AWS, a lot of the time, what you'd have is that you actually now have a free trial year. Okay, they have always free, they have free for a year, and then they have free to some specific limits. But with the S3 bucket and then the blob storage, for example, if you sign up for a new account on AWS or Azure, you'd have it free for a couple of, like almost like a whole year. Okay, and then after that, you might not necessarily have that for free again. And let's say with other options, yeah, as one person mentioned in the chat, the GCP. So GCP would actually give you just about 3 months of trial. And after that trial is over, it means that you now have to get a new, how do you call it? You might have to now start paying for all of that. Okay. Of course, if you look around, you might have some other options for, let's say, hosting a website. I think I saw a video one time. I've not really checked it out, but it was talking about how to use, for example, let's say Google Drive or something, just to host your website for a period of time. So you can probably, I mean, everybody has access to about 30 gigabytes of storage. And I think it might be a good something to check out anyway. But that's that for the paid hosting and then the free hosting. So you have those two options, okay? And for a lot of the companies that offer these services, each of them and then how they price their services. So some might be based on, let's say, the performance you want. Some might be based on the storage that you want. Some might be how you want to now access that particular site. So if you have a website like Facebook, right, hosting that on, let's say, a free hosting site will be very difficult, because just imagine the number of people that access Facebook for a very long time. So with that, you need specialized servers and all of that. You need specialized hosting for all of those things. You need a larger size. You need a lot of things to also help you with that. So that's one thing you should probably take note of. Now, we'll go on, and then we'll look at some examples of the free hosting sites that are available. We'll just touch on a number of those. Maybe you can check those out, just take a note of them and then check them out. We might not necessarily be able to demo them, but of course there are some very good ones in there. All right. All right. So one common example that we have is Heroku. Okay, so it's quite popular, and the good thing with Heroku is that it doesn't necessarily support just static websites, but it has support for static and then dynamic. Okay. Now let me just mention on that in terms of the static and then the dynamic. Right. Now, static means that it's like literally the same sort of resources that are there, okay, that are available for that particular website. And now dynamic will be something that might be able to change. So you might probably upload some files, you might edit the website in there, you might, let's say, something like Facebook is like a dynamic website, okay? Now, which site would I say is static? So let's say an information page, okay? A page just showing some information about a company, okay? Not, let's say, the company's web application that has options for you to do a lot of things, but just one website showing one simple information that does not change over a long time, okay? Maybe if they have to change that, they have to enter that, okay? But let's say for Facebook and all, you're able to now input them as and when you have to, okay? So those are things that you consider in terms of the static and then the dynamic, okay? So let's say as a designer, as someone who is setting out, maybe you want to advertise your projects for people, a static website will be just cool for you, because you just have to now showcase yourself, so talk about yourself, what you do, and all of those things, all right? So that's just something you could work at, okay? Now, so Heroku actually offers you like you can host the static and then the dynamic website. And one thing you should note, for a lot of sites that offer you dynamic hosting, okay, I mean, a lot of these are probably dynamic hosting sites. These sites, primarily, you can also store or host for your static files as well. So if you want a static website, you can host them on any of these platforms that are for the dynamic website also. And Heroku is actually free, okay, so you can check those out for that as well. And then you have Netlify, okay, Netlify, that's also a free platform, very much good and easy to use as well. You just follow along on a couple of steps. And you can look at Vessel, okay. Now, I think there was a session earlier on React.js. So for anyone who joined those sessions, that particular session, you could look out for Vessel if you want to host, let's say, your React app. Okay, if you are developing some React apps and then you want to model them or just have it hosted for people to be able to see or access across the internet, you can use the Vessel app. And of course, you have a subdomain that you'd be using. For all of these, a lot of them have subdomains that you'd be using anyway. And the only thing you'd have to do now will be that aside the subdomains, right, you can now go ahead and then buy your own domain and then just link them to the custom sites that you have. Okay, so that's for the Vessel, okay, Vessel service. And then you have Cloudflare also. That's also free. You can check that out, the Cloudflare hosting. So as I said, in terms of the free and then the hosted, free and then paid, okay. Now for some of the sites which are actually free, they are free for a period of time. Okay, so let's say with Heroku, for example, you can have that free for a lot of, literally a long time. Okay, the only thing will be in terms of the usage. So they would actually cap the usage that you are actually having on that particular site. So in terms of the storage, in terms of the number of inputs or outputs, okay, or access to your particular system. Okay, so those are some of the things that you could consider. So with a lot of these free ones, it's not ideal for, let's say, a business that's running continually, that has a lot of requests coming in from customers and all of these things. Okay. Of course, if you want to have like something like that, then you can upgrade to get like the paid one, and that would also help out. So Cloudflare, and then yeah, so the Google Cloud Platform still comes here. Okay. Now, Google Cloud Platform, of course, has a whole different services available. Okay, but if you use, for example, the cloud storage, right, you can be able to host your website. Okay, and you can use other services in there. Let's say the virtual machine. Okay, so if you're using the virtual machine on Google Cloud Platform, then you can be able to now host, like customize your environment and then do the hosting there. You can also use other services that are available. Okay, so let's say the App Engine. Okay, you can use that. If you want to use, let's say, Kubernetes engine, all of those things are available to you. But here, in terms of static website, okay, cloud storage becomes like your best bet to go with. But for Google Cloud Platform, they have multiple options available to you if you want to host your website, like or anything like that, or infrastructure. That's something that you can have. And then we have Firebase, okay, Firebase hosting, also free to some extent, of course. And then if you want to, let's say, expand on that, you can also have multiple options available to you. And then we have Hostinger. So Hostinger also is free for a certain period of time. So I know Hostinger, for example, if you are hosting your website, maybe you might be able to host just one website on there. Okay, and then that's literally about that. Okay, they have like, how do you call it, a free option that will be available to you. Okay, so that's for the one site that you are hosting, and then that sort of covers all of that. Now, you also have 00 web host. Okay, that's also like free based, and as the name suggests, you have 3 zeros there, so it's literally free. But as I said, for a number of these websites, right, once you are hosting, it will just give you a limit to how much or what you can host, okay? And then you don't have so much visibility or ability to change out, work out a lot of things that you might want to do. Okay, that's one thing with the free hosting sites. But as I said, we are looking at the static website, and that's pretty much simple to work with or to manage over the period. All right. Okay. I don't know at this point if anyone has a question, maybe you can just go ahead and then ask. We'll be looking at the options we are going to be using for our demo today. So if you have any questions, please just feel free and then ask in the chat, and then we can see how that will go. All right. I don't suppose there are any questions. All right. And let me see. How many of us have like a GitHub account? Any of us have a GitHub account? Anyone has a GitHub account? Okay. All right. That's good. That's good. Evelyn and then Arafat, you also have GitHub accounts. If you don't, maybe you can just, as we are going through the next sessions, right, you could definitely go ahead and then create one as you go along. Okay, it will be very good for you to maybe just follow along as we get that done, right? Okay, so thank you. Let's move on then. And okay, so now for what we'll be using in the demo. Hobedi, do you have a question?
Okay, yeah, just a quick one.
Okay, sure.
I just wanted to find out where is your ideal place to get like a .com.gh domain? I've been struggling to find one lately.
Okay. So a domain for, let's say, a subdomain for Ghana, right? Okay, I think there are quite a number of domain hosting providers in Ghana, or the domain registration, services in Ghana that will be able to help out with that. Under any circumstance, I don't have some off the top of my head, but just, and if anything, just reach out after the service, the session. I might be able to check out on a couple of people who might know where to get the number of those for you. All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, okay, so we'll just go ahead. And so we just want to look at these three platforms. So the GitHub pages, the AWS 3 buckets, and then the Azure blob storage. All right. Now, so let's start off with the GitHub pages. Now, I don't know if we are very much conversant with GitHub. So GitHub is, I don't know. Does anyone know of GitHub, and then maybe if they can tell us about that before we go ahead? So anyone to tell us about, say, GitHub and what they know of GitHub? I mean, what we've heard about GitHub. Yes, Hobeni, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I know GitHub is like a hosting service for any project you are working on, which is using a version control like Git. So if you are using a version control system like Git, GitHub is like one of the online services where you can host it.
Okay. All right. I think Hobeni mentioned something. He says version control and all of those things. Those are interesting things, right? So I don't know, Arafat or Evelyn, if you have any ideas on that, maybe you can also share as well. That would be good to have. But if not, we could just probably take a look at a few things here on GitHub, right? So I just searched for, maybe I'm looking for PHP code, right? And on GitHub, this is actually GitHub. Now, you notice that there are quite a lot of people putting up code in there, let's say for personal projects, for company projects, and a lot of projects. So all of these are now stored on GitHub, right? Now, as Hobenu said, okay, GitHub is based off Git, which is a version control system. Now, before Git, there were quite a number of version control systems that were available. Okay, you could probably read around those as well. And each of them solved the whole issue of people collaborating on code or working on code. Each of them had an approach to solving that. Okay. Now, Git is now widely used. Okay. And then we have a lot of platforms building on top of Git. Okay, so we have GitLab, we have Azure DevOps. Okay, Azure DevOps does build a bit on that. We have Cloud Source, Google Cloud Source repository, and we have GitLab, as I said, Gitbucket, and GitHub itself, right? So on these platforms, you can find a lot of code in there that people store on there, right? Now, when you come to GitHub pages, right? That's an offering from GitHub, which allows you to now start off for whatever website that you want to build. Okay, so if it's a static website, it now becomes very simple for you to get done. So you have your GitHub repository, and then automatically whatever changes you made within the repository, it's made on those particular GitHub pages. All right, so it's pretty much simple. You can check out this particular site to read more as to how that works. So you create a repository, whatever client that you're using there in your machine, online, whichever one that you want to work with. You have your repository cloned, and then you're able to go ahead with that. Now, they might reference a couple of technical terms. If you're not used to GitHub, there are quite a couple of things there. So pull, push, merge, all of those things. But I mean, we're not going to get stuck on all those terms. We're going to try and then get that done for ourselves in a very simple way. Okay, so literally everybody can get that done if you follow along pretty much simply on that. Okay, so that's for GitHub pages. You can check out this particular page as you go along. All right, and you can move from there. Okay, so within our demo, we'd actually try and then create for ourselves like a very simple page. Okay, so we create that from the GitHub pages, let's say online, and then we'll try to probably upload our own file also to see how that goes, and then we work from there. All right, so that's that for the GitHub pages. Now, okay, the next one is the AWS S3 bucket. Okay, and AWS is actually Amazon Web Services. I did a session talking about migrating your business to the cloud, where I was giving some insight into what these cloud services are. Okay, you can check Mobile Web Gunner's site, and then you might be able to find that particular recording just to learn a bit about what the cloud is. And I think later in the afternoon also, there's a session on introduction to the cloud, okay, which you can catch up on if you've not already, that if you're not able to join. And then I think last year during the Digital Skills Conference, there was also a session on how to, an introduction to the cloud. Primarily, I think it was, Audrey was the one who was working on that within that particular session. So you can catch up on those sessions as well. But this is the Amazon Web Services, okay? And now with cloud, what you are doing is that you are now accessing storage, you're accessing network, you're accessing security, you're accessing quite a number of these things on the compute. Okay, compute becomes very critical there. So you're accessing all of these over the internet. That is, I will not say simple definition. There's so much technicalities in there, but this is what you are doing. So let's say you're accessing storage. Okay, now don't forget, storage brings to mind hosting, right? What we're talking about when you are hosting your website. And then compute. So however you're going to process some information, let's say for your machine learning environment or something like that. Okay, that's something you could look at. And then all of that. Now, if you look here, it talks about a number of things. So EC2, okay, a virtual machine. I mentioned a virtual machine a couple of while ago. And here we have something about the domain, okay, where we talked about the hosting and then the domain, right? So you can register actually a domain on the cloud provider, okay? And we have a web app with Elastic Beanstalk, virtual service with Lightsail also, all right? Now, there are quite a lot of these services that are available if you want to host your website. So what we see here with the EC2, you can actually host your website there. That's like you building out your machine, and then you can now create a service from there. And then we have the EBS, the Elastic, no, not the EBS. EBS is for block storage, but Elastic Beanstalk, okay, so this is this one here, okay, where you can just build your web app. You don't want to worry your head about how you manage the underlying infrastructure. So if you are doing, for example, an EC2 and then you are hosting a website, you might consider the underlying infrastructure. But with the Elastic Beanstalk, it's pretty much straightforward, and then you can just pick up from there, right? And then Lightsail sort of abstracts a bit from the EC2. Not so much you get done, but it's pretty much good to go with as well, right? But because we are working with just the hosting, okay, and then we are looking at just a static website, Amazon offers a service called the S3 service, okay, and for a number of us, I don't know if anyone has used an S3 backend before, but I can tell you that for the lot of us, we might have used S3 at some point, one way or the other. So even for Netflix, for example, they actually use S3 to host a number of their movies, or literally they store their movies on the S3 buckets, okay? And then that's something that you're able to access. So if you've used Netflix at some point, you might have used the S3 bucket, okay? I was hoping that I'll be able to get a documentation of what the S3 bucket does. But most definitely, you can read on that when you get the time, okay? All right, so that's for the S3. So that's what we're using for storing our files, okay? We'll actually come back to that a bit later. And then, but I don't know, if there's a question from anyone, please, you can go ahead and then ask in terms of the S3 buckets, yes. Or with regards to the Amazon Web Services, if there's any question, please feel free to go ahead with that. Give me a second. Let me try and then get the, yes, Hoveni, please go ahead.
With the S3, are you giving an option to choose a zone, maybe for us in Ghana here, closer to Africa or Ghana?
Yes,
or
yes.
You
yes, yes.
Or you are coming back to that. Are you getting there?
Yes, probably I'll talk about that, but it's a good question. Maybe I could still answer that from here. Okay. Now, one thing people tend to think about when they are hosting their website is how to better serve their customers, right? And that's, so let's say if I'm in Ghana, okay, I might want to have the site closer to Ghana. So, you know, on the internet, the cables and all of that that connects the internet. One thing you should note is that these they run quite a long distance. If you go on YouTube, you can just check about the cables that connect us for the internet, right? Now, so if you are serving a website or you are hosting a website, one thing people tend to consider is how close can I get the resources to my people? Okay, so let's say, for example, with the example that we gave with a delivery, right? Now, if I get a delivery guy who is closer to where I'm sending my package to, or who can to pick up the resources from my end at a very faster rate, that becomes a good thing for us to have, right? And that's the same thing if you are hosting a website. So for S3, most of these cloud services, for example, they tend to host these resources closer to you. So you can actually choose to host. I know S3, for example, or AWS, they have this option for you to store your files in, let's say, South Africa or something like that. Okay, so South Africa is like the, not say the closest, but in Africa, they have a region in South Africa where you can host your files there. Okay, now, I mean, South Africa is literally on the bend of Africa, so it's simpler for you to have that as compared to, let's say, somewhere in Australia or something like that. Okay, so those are the things that are available. So when Hobenu mentions in terms of having a zone closer to you, that is, now you can host your resources closer to you, and then you can be able to access that as and when you have to. All right. So that's just by the way. I think I did not really get my account set up for here. So let me just log in pretty quickly. I forgot about that. Let's see. All right. All right, so let me just show a bit of the Azure console as well, the Microsoft Azure, and then we can move on from there. All right, but if anyone else has a question, please just feel free to go ahead with that. And Evelyn, were you able to get the account created for the GitHub? I don't know if you're able to do that as of yet, but that would be good to have anyway. All right, so this for the Microsoft Azure. So that's okay, that's good. So the Microsoft Azure is for, how do you call it? When you are working with, what's the word for that? That's also a cloud platform. So we have Azure, top players, we have Azure, we have Amazon, we have Google Cloud Platform, we have other ones like Alibaba, we have Oracle, we have DigitalOcean. Like there are quite a number of them. There are some also who are specialized for, let's say, some specific operations. Okay, so those are quite a number of those. I think recently with the S3 that we are going to use, right? There was in the news a company, I've forgotten exactly, it's quite widely known, a wide-known company, but they are also looking to have an option of, how do you call it, a competitor for the S3 bucket, which would actually, so the S3 bucket that we're using, as I said, we might be able to host our sites there for free, okay, but that will be after 1 year, okay, so after 1 year, you'd actually now have to pay for the additional components that you want to use on there. Okay, so that's something you have to take note of. All right, so that's just that, by the way. And then yeah, so Azure is also a cloud service platform, and so they have different services available now. For the S3 option that we are going to be using here, we'll actually be using the storage, blob storage. Okay, so now you don't have to understand necessarily how the interface works. Okay, once you start learning and then using that for a while, you actually get to understand how that works for a bit. But for now, you don't have to necessarily worry your head about that, because we're just going to be hosting, how do you call it, some simple website on that. Okay, so just take note of that, and then you'll be pretty much good to go. All right. So that's that. We can probably go ahead. So we're using the Azure Blob Storage. Okay. Now, Blob Storage allows you to store files. So whatever type of files that you want to use, it allows you to now be able to store all of those. Okay. And then with the S3 also, you're also able to store some amount of files in there. Okay. So that's about that in terms of what we are going to be using for hosting our websites. Okay. Let me just stop sharing my screen for a bit. So one thing I wanted us to do was to have, how do you call it, a website that we could all test out. But I mean, I'll be able to share that in time. Let's see what can be done in here. All right. I think in the end, we'll just go with some simple website that we could all be able to look at. Okay. Yeah. So I actually got this particular website pretty much simple online. Okay. When you go online, right, there are quite a lot of websites that you can use. So for any of us who want to, let's say, host our own website, you can find quite a number of these sites available. So you can just check out for free HTML, or let's say, you can go with Bootstrap templates. Okay, Bootstrap templates, profile templates. Okay, so if you want to put out your work profile templates, and then you can get a whole listing of them. So there are quite a number of them that are free. And then once you have access to them, you can change them or edit them to suit whatever you want to do. Okay. Now, if you go to YouTube for the Africa Digital Skills Conference, I mean, last year, one of the sessions was on web development, where I think Stephen was the one who was taking that. He was talking about how to now edit these to make them your own web page. Okay, so maybe instead of having like, let's say, hi, I'm Donald, I could just change that for myself. Okay, so I don't have to build from scratch. Okay, all I need to do is to just change a couple of things, take a couple of things out, and then I'm pretty much good to go. I don't know, let me try changing that a bit. So I have that open here. I'll just change a few things in here, and then we can probably get started, all right? For our demos, you might not necessarily use, how do you call it? We might not necessarily use this template. We'll just have a simple website, just displaying a test, and then we'll be good to go. But once you catch up on that particular video, how to, let's say, edit a website for yourself, you can then get an understanding of what you are able to do, and then how you are able to now add that to whatever you're working with, all right? But for our demos, you might just go ahead and then use some simple websites, okay? So with what we had here, I could just go ahead and then change. And please don't worry if you are not able to understand what exactly is happening here. Okay, it's pretty much easy to get, okay? So it's just more like I'm changing the aspects. Are we able to see my screen? I think I might not. Are we able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, okay, sure. So I'll just edit. I'll just probably change the name. I'll keep everything else, but I'll just change the name, and then that'll be all that there is to that. So instead of Donald here, I'll just put my name here, and go here. I just saved that, and yeah, so that sort of reflects here for us to see. So I just changed that. So if anything, that's something you can get to pick up on within the session that I mentioned, okay? I might probably find that. Let me see if I can find that for you guys. African digital programs. All right, so here on this particular page, yeah, so that's this one here. Okay, so this particular session, you can look at how to now modify like a web page and then be able to use that. Okay, now Betty, I think, had a session earlier on React.js, that's for web development as well. You can check that out. And I think there were a couple on WordPress, there was a couple on Joomla. Yeah, there was Joomla presentation as well. So these are things you can check out, because a lot of these sessions are actually recorded for you to be able to look out for them. So for this particular one, this from last year, so you can check it out, and then that could give you something that you can host either on your GitHub pages, or I think GitHub pages would be very much good for that, since it's sort of linked to your GitHub account, okay? And if you want to go with the S3 or the blob storage, that's also something that you can go with as well, okay? So that's just that. Maybe I'll just share that link in the chat here for anyone who might want to pick that. Maybe so for Zoom, a lot of the oh, let me just do that here. So for Zoom, one thing is that a lot of the chat is actually missing after the session is done. So, and if you drop off or join back, it might not be there. So you can just catch up on that, and then you go with that. So I don't know, probably I might have a very plain simple test. As I said, we might not necessarily use this one, but that's just by the way for you guys. So we can start off with our GitHub pages, okay? And then we move on from there. Okay, right. So now, one thing you should note, if you want to use GitHub pages to host your website, okay, one thing you should note is that it works on the principle of whatever username that you are using. That is what you'd have for your particular website. So with this, I created a test account for the Africa Digital Skills Conference. Okay, so ADSC test. Okay, so that would actually be a part of the name that I'll have for whatever hosted item that I'm having. Okay, now don't forget what I mentioned. So after you're done hosting your site, you can have a custom domain where you can now attach that to your website. So they generate one for you, which you can access your hosted items or materials, but you can still go ahead and then have a custom domain at some point, which will point to the resources that are available here. Okay, so whatever I do, it will now have, let's say, let me just show you my, I don't think Audrey did. Okay, let me just show you mine. So my GitHub username is mengoima.github.io. Okay, and so let's just go there and then just take a look at that. Yeah, so this is just like something simple that I did. All right. Now, I'm yet to actually build on this, but this is how it is. Now, what I want to show you is that here, the very first one is my GitHub username or my GitHub profile name. So whatever name I pick, if I use a fancy name, it might be difficult for me to maybe sell it out to some customers or something, right? So ideally, if you want to use your GitHub account, okay, to host, or you want to use a GitHub pages, it will be good to now have something like a name that's very much ideal for, or very much convenient. Okay, so here I use Mengoima, and as I said, you'd have the subdomain. So everything you'd have like, let's say mengoima.github.io. Everyone else would have that also, so .github.io. And then your username will be the differentiator between various web pages. And this actually looks pretty much simple, something you can just share along for people to see. Okay, so you can just design your page. So this particular one that I have here, if I had that well set, I could now make sure upload that here, and then anyone can be able to access that. Okay, so let's get started on that. All right, yeah, and just I forgot to mention. So with what we are looking at, we're just looking at the GitHub pages and then the cloud options, right? So Azure and then AWS. Now, I had also another previous session which tackled a bit of the Zero Web Host, one of the free hosting sites that I mentioned. Okay, that's also on Mobile Web Ghana website, Facebook page. You can catch up on those. I mean, for a lot of these things, the resources are available. So you can check Mobile Web Ghana, you can check the African Digital Skills Conference, and then you can build from there. These skills actually intertwine at some point in time. So even how to make your website visible, you can look at the SEO sessions here, and you can now build from all of them. So don't see the sessions as different sessions that, let's say, I attend one session and then that's that. But you can learn something from the other, and then you can apply to the other ones as well. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Okay. All right. So when we come back here, sorry, is there anyone who has a question, please? I think I'm speaking so much. I don't know if anyone has a question. Please just feel free to ask that before we go on. I think we're at the top of the hour now. If anyone has a question, please feel free to ask, and then we can go on. All right. Would it be okay if probably maybe one of you can share their screen instead? So either Evelyn or Hobenu, you can share your screen, and then maybe we work from there to create our first web page with the GitHub pages. So maybe if one of you is willing, fine. If not, I could just go ahead and then you pick up from whatever I'll be doing. So if you're able to share, that's fine. If not, just let me know and then I can just go ahead as well.
Oh, I am connected on a mobile device.
Okay. All right. Okay. I don't know if Evelyn or Arafat. Okay, let me just go ahead, no problem. I mean, it would be good. I thought you had that done so that you could just follow along, but don't worry. So first off, I can create a repository here, and then that will be pretty much good for me. Now, this is more like the home page, okay? Now, if I go to my username, so ADSC test right here, I could also create a new repository from there. Now, when we talk of the repository, that's more like the standard, or how do you call it? That's where your code is stored, okay? So you can have various repositories, and then you can have a repository storing information for some particular website, okay? So here, I can have the repository that will store the files for my particular website. So that would be like where I'm hosting all those files at, okay? So either I am on the homepage, Okay, so the home page, I can create a repository here. Or if I come to my particular account or my username, my user home page, more or less, right? So if I come here and then I go to repositories, I still have access to the repository available to me. And then I can create a new repository. Okay, so I can go ahead and click new. Okay, now you see that it shows me that the owner. Now, probably you might have multiple accounts, right? So based on the particular account, you can be able to select that and then you add the repository name. Now, because we are wanting to use a GitHub page, one thing you should take note of is that you have to ensure that the name is what? Your username. So I still have to get the what? ADSC test, okay? So you can just see that here, ADSC test. And then now this is one additional component you can have. So for your GitHub account, you can have a README page, okay? And with this particular page, what happens is that when anybody opens your initial page, it sort of pops up and then shows a lot of things. So you can show some statistics as to the number of codes that you've contributed to, the number of frameworks or the languages you work with. All of those things are things that you can have with that particular README. But we want to go ahead and then we add the github.io. Okay, so when I showed my website, so when I showed my website here, you notice that the username was what? mengoima.github.io. Okay, now let me just see something if I can find that here. Okay, so let me just see if I can find that here. Give me a second. So one good thing here is that we are able to explore a bit, all right? That's whatever we are doing. Okay, yeah, so you notice that this is the name of the repository, right? So there are other repositories here, but the repository that holds my particular, the web page that we saw, okay, so this one here. Okay, now you notice that I have to what? Name that based on my username, which is here, and then .github.io. Okay, so whatever we are doing here also, that is what will be used. Okay, so ADSC test.github.io. Now, I was doing an initial test before the session, and one thing, so if you get the name wrong, okay, now it will be quite difficult it will not be difficult for you to get the website, but it might not show as you want it to be, okay? So you have to pay close attention to that. So ADSC test.github.io, and whatever username you use from your end, right? You can go ahead and then add that. Now you can give a description, let's say my personal website. Okay, let's say my portfolio website, yeah. Website, okay. And now take note here, there are two options. We have the public and then the private. Now, public means that anyone can access that on the internet, okay. Now, when I showed you my profile, right, there are quite a number of how do you call it, repositories that were available. Let me just switch back there. Just switch back there. Let me explain that to you guys. Can't seem to find that. Right. Okay. So when I came here, you notice that there are quite a number of these that are showing here. Okay, in terms of the repositories. Now, all of these are public repositories that I have, right? Now, aside these repositories that are available here, there are some that I work on, maybe at work or something, that are hidden, okay, or some personal projects that are not necessarily showing here. Okay, now, if I don't make that particular repository public and I make it private, it means that no one can actually access that particular website. Okay, so it's good and then ideal for you to have that one as public. Okay, so don't forget, once you want to make that a GitHub page, just make sure that it's public and then anyone at all can be able to access that. Okay, now aside that, there are a number of things that you can choose. Now, in terms of the licenses, so if you want to make that accessible to everyone, a lot of sites, let's say, are open source. So they might use, let's say, a GPL license, or let's say MIT license. Like, all of these are available. And I mean, you can learn more about them. The good thing is that you can read more about what these entail. And then there's the gitignore file. So ideally, let's say on your system, right, when you have the code, you don't want that particular code to be shared in your repositories. Okay, so let's say you store some passwords on your local machine within that particular file environment. Now you can use the gitignore to make sure that those particular files are not accessible for anyone on the internet. So those are not added to your repository when it's finally done. Okay, so that's one thing. And then a README file, when anyone goes to that repository, right, it gives them a fair idea of what the repository is about. Okay, so let's just see. Let's see here. I do not have one for the developer here. Okay, so something like this. This is actually not my repository. This is someone's repository that the person copied, had available. That I made a copy of that. Okay, so if you look here, it's a README file, right? And that gives you information of what this particular repository is about. You can choose to add that, you can choose to ignore that, okay? But it's actually a best practice to actually have a README file. In our case, I think we'll just skip that for now, okay? But if you want to do that, you just go ahead and then add the README file or add the ignore file, and then you can choose your license also. I'm just going to leave all of those blank for now, okay? And then we'll just move ahead. So I'll just go ahead and then create the repository, and then that would move on from there. Okay, so I have this created. Okay, now let's see if we can access that particular website. So adsc.github.io. Okay, let's see what we have. Okay, right. It tells us that there isn't a GitHub pages site here. Okay, so I mean, we'll keep coming back here to see at which point we now have the site available to the public. All right. Okay. Now, GitHub is pretty much available for you to use on different sessions. So let's say if you want to now access that on the repository. So let's say on my system, I want to be able to push a file to this particular system. That's something that's possible, okay? So I can create a new repository from my command line, then that would work. Or I can push an existing repository from the command line. So here, when we say repository, it's more like the folder that contains all of our files, okay? Or I can import another one from another repository. So let's say I had another repository. So let's say I want to copy files from my personal website or like portfolio site. That's also possible. So these are options that you can look at. Now, when we come back here, and then we look at, when we look closely here, right? It says get started by creating a new file or uploading an existing file, okay? Now, here, I could upload an existing file. So if I wanted to use, let's say, this particular one that we created, right? I could find the index files and then the, how do you call it? The additional files that are needed, okay? And then I could use that. But let's try something. Let's create a new file and then let's see how it goes. So let's take note of something. So if you are creating a website, there's something we call the index page, okay? And the index page will be like the go-to. So when you open your website, that becomes the go-to place that you go to. Or let's say the go-to place that you are presented with on your screen. Okay, so ideally, a lot of people tend to use the index.html, so you can have that. You can actually change the settings of your particular system such that it's possible for you to have like, how do you call it? It's possible to have a different file. So I can have like, let's say main.html, but I'll have to now specify that. Let's keep that as main.html, and then we'll look at how that reflects when we are making our site available. Okay. Now, I'm just going to put in like some simple tags here for the HTML. I'm not going to write anything fancy. Just a statement. This is our session. on the ADSC 2021. Let me add another paragraph. Now, please, I know Hobenu would definitely have some insight into how the syntax might work. I don't know if you, Evelyn, but you don't have to really worry your head so much about that. As I mentioned, right, there are quite a number of sessions that will tackle all of what the HTML website is, or how to create your first website or something like that. So you don't have to, this session is not to focus on that primarily. So if you don't get that, or it's difficult to follow from that, you can just catch up on that a bit later. Okay, so that's just by the way. All right, so let's see. This is a session on AWS. We are looking at hosting. All right, so just something simple like this. And then once I'm done, right, whatever changes I want to do, I could just come here and then I can commit the new file. Now, when you are committing the file name, right, GitHub has a lot of things which you don't have to really tackle or look at so much. But there's something like a commit message, right? Now, what a commit message does, so I think as we were talking about what GitHub really does, I think Hobenu mentioned that you're able to now collaborate with people, right? Now, whenever you make a commit or whenever you add a new file or make some changes, right? The commit message now gives a description of what was done. Okay, so you see here, it tells us that what it was generated for us automatically. It says that we created a main.html file, and that's pretty much explainable enough. Now, if you were making some extra changes, we can now add those as well to the commit messages, and then it will be easier to probably work with. Okay, so once you are done, you commit the new file, and then that file will now be available within where we have it. Okay, now I don't know, is any of you trying to work, is anyone working on that from your own machine or something? Evelyn or Hobenu, are you doing that from your machine as well?
Give me a minute. Let me just log into my GitHub.
Okay, okay. And what of you, Evelyn?
Okay, I'm in my GitHub.
All right. And Evelyn, were you able to get that? Or you'd probably try that out later? Okay, no worries. Okay, so Hobenu, just let me know if I can go ahead or if I should just hold on a bit.
Please, you can proceed.
All right, sure. Okay, so we created the repository, right? And now we created a file which we can now access, let's say when we are working with the GitHub pages, right? So I could just go ahead then and then come to settings here. Okay, now this would actually allow me to make that particular website available on the internet. So let's see if we are still able to access that. I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay. Right. So now you notice that the message actually changed from what we had at first. Let me see if I'm able to find the old message here. Okay, no, it didn't have that. Okay, so it says what the site configured at this address does not contain the requested file. Okay, if you are the owner of the site, right? So it says what for root files. Let's look at that here, right? This is very much important. You must provide what an index.html file. Okay, I don't know. Maybe let's try creating the index.html file before maybe we come back here and then see. Let me just create an index.html file. Let's see if they would allow us to see that. So let me just add this. I want to see. And let's say test file. Let me just type that out. We'll still render that for us, so no worries. Okay. All right. So one thing you should notice too is that when you make the changes, sometimes it doesn't reflect literally like the same time. Okay, so maybe we might still open that and then it would give us a couple of issues. All right, so we had the index file there, but it's still giving us this particular error. Okay, but one thing you should realize is that what it tells us that what there's actually probably a GitHub page here. Okay, now the very first one that we had, it told us that okay, there's actually no GitHub page configured for this particular site. So this time it tells us that okay, we actually see that you are trying to, or you have like something that could work for a GitHub pages, okay, or something, a site that we are able to access on this particular site. Okay, so now the next step to go about will be to come to the settings here, okay, and on the left pane, right, we now have multiple options available to us. And I was mentioning something about us being very careful when we are giving the name of our file, okay? So here, maybe if you made a mistake in naming your repository, you can make those changes here, okay, still within the settings. So I could probably change that to let's say .com. I rename that, and then it changes that for me. Now, if I come back here, of course, it's going to tell me, oh, okay, it loaded a file later. Okay, now it's able to recognize that I actually changed my file format .io. Okay, so that's one thing there. But I mean, once we have the upload done, most often it's able to now pick those particular files for us. Okay, but let's still go on. We want to have the main.html as a file. Okay, but of course we have to revert the name back to what .io. Okay, and then we can proceed from there. Okay. Okay, so back to our settings, right? And then we come back to pages. So on the left side, right, there are quite a number of things here, security branches, all of these things. Now, because of our focus area, what we'll be looking at it will be just the pages, right? So you come to pages here, and then it tells us that what your website is what published at what this particular site here. Okay, here. Now, here it tells us which particular document you are picking from. So we have the root document. So let's say the /, that's the root. Or maybe if you had created another folder. So if you had a folder /docs, we could probably select that as well. Okay. And then, yes, I spoke something about a custom domain. Okay. So if you wanted to have a custom domain, you can probably look at having that also done here. So they say what allows you to serve your site from a domain other than adsctest.github.io. Okay, so that's something you can also look at. All right. So maybe if I had my own website, I could just type that one here as well, and then I save that. So whenever we go to this site, we'll probably redirect us to where we are here. Okay. All right. Now, take note. So with the main.html, right, I'm actually not given an option to select that as my initial file or the file that I'll work with initially. Okay, so take note. It's ideal for us to make sure that, let me just open this in a new tab. So it's ideal for us to make sure that the initial file that we want to work with, we have the name rightly done, so that it doesn't give us some issues, okay? Let me just edit that from here. All right, so I can change, this is the test file that we have. So let me just change that to test.html, all right? And then I can commit that particular change. Okay. And then we can still come back to the main.html. This is what we want to actually use, okay? And then we change that to index.html. Right. Now, once I'm done with that, I think that'll be good to go. So as at this point, right, once the changes actually reflect, which would actually be like within just a few minutes, right? And then I keep refreshing. Okay, so we can come back and then keep refreshing. So after those changes actually reflect, we should be able to see all those changes that we made actually showing here. Okay, so it will just take a while for that to reflect, and then we can actually see that. Now, I just wanted to point out something. So you notice that here, we're actually creating the files by ourselves, okay? And that's, it's still not showing. Okay, no worries. That happens sometimes, but I just want to point out something. Right. So once we have this actually done, okay, we could then go ahead, and then there's also another option that GitHub offers us. Now, I don't know if you saw this. So when we first came to pages.github.com, it mentioned something about, how do you call it? Jekyll. Okay, so Jekyll. So that's also another option that you have available. And it says what you can actually choose your own team at some point if you want to. Okay, so anything at that, you can actually go ahead and then choose all of that. So here you can pick your own team that you want to work with, and then you are able to edit that also. So if I don't want to create something like that, I could still come here, okay, and then I pick a team, okay. Now for all of these, they have pre-built information available to us, okay. So we have the header 1, we have header 2, all of those things. So what I can do is to probably select one of those, and then let's see. Let me just check if this shows first. I had more tabs than I bargained for. All right, so let's pick one of these ones, okay. I'm confused which one to go with. Okay, I think the architect would be pretty good. So I just select that, right? And then that becomes available to us. Now, note that I did an index.html file, so there might still be a conflict in terms of how the files are going to show, but let's still see how that goes. Yeah, okay. It's still taking a while to refresh, but someone can try that from their end. Let me just put the link here in the chat. You can try it from the end and then see what you are able to view from there. Hobenu, from your end, have you been able to get yours showing?
I'm still working on it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you notice that it actually, for this site, picked the initial page that we had, right? So with the index.html, okay? Now let me show you something here. And then you notice that, okay, it did not, because of the way we actually built that, it did not get the team directly done, okay? All right, maybe I'll just create a new repository, and then we'll do that primarily with the Jekyll, and then see how that looks like, all right? All right. Evelyn said that reflected. That's good. All right. All right. Good. So, I mean, for ideally, the initial page that we worked with, that's actually shown. But because we had our own web page, it sort of conflicted with what we had with the Jekyll. Okay, so let's look at something. So let's come back to our initial page, and we want to create a repository. Quick one, does anyone have a question before probably I go on? Any question from anyone before I go on? If you have one, you can just put that in the chat, and then we would look at that as we go along. Okay. So I want to create another repository, right? And then let me call this, I don't know what to call this. Let's say pages, right? No need for a description or something like that. So I'm just going to create that because I want us to see how that will go with the Jekyll. And then I come back here with the settings and still in my pages here. Okay, so I can pick a team. Okay, so let's pick a team here. Now, you notice, I think I should have shown that first. Now, there was a mention of, okay, there was a mention that what, this is actually not what a GitHub page is. Now, you notice that when we had it done for GitHub ADSC test.github.io, ideally when we came to the pages, it was already activated for us. All we had to do was now to configure that to reflect what exactly we wanted to see. Okay. Now, if this is actually a different page, a repository altogether. Okay, so we want to sort of activate that to work for us as a GitHub page. Okay, so I could go ahead. Let's select the team. Let me just pick any of the teams. That works fine. And you notice that what it creates what an index.md file for us. Okay, now this the website, and it actually uses Markdown. Okay, so Markdown is actually different from, let's say, HTML, for example. Okay, so Markdown, they have their own bit. So you know, notice with the HTML, when I wanted to do the heading, right, I actually did like a tag, H1, and then that worked. So I had something like, let's say, H1. Okay, let's add that, and then let's see. Welcome to GitHub pages, right? I just want us to look at how that would look like. Okay, so this actually uses Markdown. Okay, so there's actually a link here. So we'll link to this one, and then another link here. Okay, so with this, it creates this particular file for you, and then I can commit those changes. Don't forget, commit means that what I'm now saving that, right? And then it's done for me. Okay, now let's see. Let's come back to here with the GitHub pages. Let's see how it looks like. Now, what do we see here? It tells us that what your site is published at what ADSC test.github.io and then /pages, right? So let's go there and then see what they have for us. So we see that here, right? So welcome to GitHub pages. And then the H1 element did not actually show because this particular file uses what the Markdown. Okay. So Markdown is actually different from HTML anyway. So this is what it looked like. And then this particular one, you can also edit that, okay, based on the themes that are available to you. And then they have quite a number of links with the links that I showed from here. Okay, so that's like a simple way to go about that. So you can look at the themes that are available, and then you can now build out like a static website for yourself. Okay, so that's how simple it gets when you are going with the GitHub pages. It's not really something difficult. Now, I would have wanted us to use this particular one, but it will involve us uploading some aspects of the CSS and all of that, which might probably take, okay, it might not take a while, but it might give us some bit of a challenge. All right. Okay, let's do something, right? Let's let's upload literally the bare bones of that. Let me rename the index file that we had originally to something else here. And please don't forget, if you have some questions, kindly put that in the chat, and then we can look at that later. So now let me just add this one here. All right, so I want to add with the one that we had on my local system. Okay. So that's uploaded for us. So if you're uploading from your system, right, of course, with what I showed, you can go to the upload, add file, okay, and then upload the files, okay. Now, let's see here. So I can go ahead and then I can drag and drop, okay, or I can choose the files here, and then I can select that from my system, wherever that will be, okay. So let's see here. That's that here. So if I just selected those ones, that will also show. So let me see if I can add the portfolio services, all of those things. And okay, let's see. I think I could add the folders. I hope that works. Sometimes it gives like some whole form of a difficult task with those. But let's see. Okay, I think those might work as well. If that works, that's fine. We'll get to actually see the full website, which is good. Let's commit those changes and then see what they have for us. Okay, yeah, they didn't get the folders right. They didn't get the folders right. All right, all right. But I mean, there are other means to actually add those particular folders, right? So let's say if you are using the command prompt or the SQL client, you can actually now be able to add those ones pretty much simply. So that's not really something you should worry your head about. It will be simpler to go. Or you can even change the structure of your files such that you can be able to access them. So we've actually added these. Still on the point that it might take a while to reflect, right? So, okay, yeah, it's showing now. But you notice something, because we did not get, so for any HTML file that you are working with, right, you need to be able to add the CSS and all of those things. If those ones are not placed very well, or the structure is broken. So those were the ones that we had within the folder. So with the CSS here, which we've not been able to upload as it stands, right? So all of those will be very much difficult to show. So it would show the website for us, but it would look a bit distorted, but it's literally the same information. So I can still go with the portfolio. You can see that the portfolio loads, blog details, yeah, single blog. All of these are available to us, and then we are pretty much good to go. All right. So that's about that with the GitHub pages. So with this, you can actually build up like very simple site, which everybody can actually now take a look at, okay? And then you can work from there. I don't know if anyone has a question at this point, you can definitely go ahead and then ask. If there's any question, please just go ahead and then ask, and then we can possibly move ahead from there. All right. Okay. Habenu, were you able to complete yours?
I'm trying to build something simple like a blog just to put in some dummy text. I'm still on the HTML.
Something simple like a blog. I mean, you can just go ahead and then have, let's say, one heading, and then that'll be okay. Just to make sure that you have that working from your end. Okay.
Okay. But just a quick one. Can you set up the GitHub pages in a way that anytime you make any changes and you save it, it's automatically uploads on the website?
Yes. So that's actually what GitHub pages does, but it's not like, how do you call it? It's not like, it's not done right that moment. So it takes like about a couple of seconds to replicate that. Okay, so all those changes are made. So you realize that with the changes that we make here, we just save that on the GitHub account, and then it sort of reflects after a while. You get it? So it's actually done automatically for you, more or less. All right, but it's not like it does not reflect that same instance. It just takes some while to replicate. Now, I think primarily these are based on the fact that how do you call it? In terms of, let's say, some form of cache storage and all, that makes it impossible for us to work with. You get it? But it definitely makes that possible for you. So it's actually done for you. Yeah, that's what I mean to say. Yeah. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. So I think does that for how do you call it? The GitHub pages. So we have that done. As it stands, right? Wow. I know that time will fly this much. Okay, so I'll just want us to look at the bit with S3. Okay, let's go with the Azure Blob Storage. Okay, with the S3, when I was looking at that, going over that again, we had to do some bit of configurations, which I think might be a bit hard on us. Okay, not hard, but it might require quite a lot of things. So let's look at the Azure bit. Let's say hosting another website on Azure, and then see how that would also look like. All right. Right. So as I mentioned, Azure is for cloud. Okay, so they actually have various services that are available to them. So we see some bit of databases at all, but we are not focusing on all those things because what we are looking at is that we want to just get our website hosted and then just our static website hosted, and then we are done with that. Okay, so that will be pretty much good to go. No need to stress so much about all the other things. So we see a VM. So if you actually create a VM, we can actually use that to host a static website if you want to. That would be a lot of wasted resources and money, but that's something that can be done. And you can also use the app services as well. That's also possible. And I think their container services are also available, which you can go with as well. So let's say a simple container instance or some form of Kubernetes service also would be pretty much good to go. But these are not really our focus. I mean, cloud is an interesting space. If you want to look at that also, that's pretty much good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I think the next session I spoke about, right, that might actually be introduction to cloud. That would actually be at 4. So I think that would be at 4. Yeah. So maybe you can still get to catch up on that if anything, right? All right. So let's go on. So I have the account already created. Okay. So now with the with hosting on the Azure, okay. Now, as I said, we are using the blob storage, right? And so we have to blob storage. We have to create like a service account, okay, which we can. I'm sorry, a storage account which we can work with, okay. And so I can just go ahead to my storage account here, okay, and then I can create one for myself, okay. Now I don't necessarily have to. So you realize with the GitHub pages, I had to go by some specific naming convention, right? Here too, I can have that, but it's not that stringent. Like any name would actually work out. You don't have to necessarily type that out in some specific form or way. Okay. Any of those would work. So I can, once I come here, I click on create. It actually takes a while to load. Okay, you see that loading at the top there. So let's just have that load. Now, so when we come here, there are quite a number of things: basic, advanced, networking, data protection. These are a lot of things that you don't have to worry your head so much about. Now, for any account that you create, right? Now, a lot of subscription, you have a subscription that you're using. The subscription I used was for students, okay? The Azure for students. Maybe you might have your own paid subscription that you're working with. That's also possible. And then that's something you work with. Now, a lot of your resources will be grouped in some specific form. So I could have, let's say, a different resource group. Okay, so let's say I can have something like a D-Day. Now, here, what happens is that all that I'll be working with, so if I'm creating a virtual machine or whatever, I can have them grouped together under one space. Okay, now, if you look at GCP, for example, they have like a resource hierarchy and all of those things. So you have your, what do you call it? You have your organization, you have all those aspects. So your resources, your folders, all of those things. Those are things that you could have in them, right? So here, the resource is also grouped in one space. So definitely you need to have a resource group in there. Okay, so I can just pick up D-Day and then I can give it a name, right? So the name would actually form a part of whatever I'm doing. So let's just go with the ADSC test, okay? And then now, I think Hobeni was asking about when we are placing our resources close to where we are, okay? So there are quite a number of places that are available here, okay? But I think we'll still go with what we have here with this one, US East, or we can pick something from Europe. Europe is pretty much close, right up there, or something from the Middle East. All of these are pretty close as well, okay? But I think for now, we can just create that what we have. Now, redundancy. Now, the good thing is that with a lot of these things, a lot of the things they are talking about, you don't have to really understand them for what we are doing, okay? But if you want to, as I said, if you want to learn about cloud, that's a good thing to actually read about. And one good thing with Azure, a lot of them, is that they give you a fair idea of what is being referenced there. Okay, so region, it tells us what actually a region is. Performance tells us what a performance, what entails in the performance. The redundancy, that's also something that's available. Now, one advantage of cloud, of course, is that when, let's say, your service is not available for some reason, you still have like some form of backup or something to run with. Okay, so that's all part of what you can have here. So you can pick based on that. I will just go with the LRS. Okay, it doesn't really matter so much here. All right, I think already you can share the link. Maybe we can just take a look at that from here as well with your demo site as well. You can just share that. And yeah, and if you're also done with yours, you can also share that, and then we can take a look at that as well. Okay. All right. So I have this done. With the advanced networking, data protection, all of those things, I don't have to worry my head about it. All I can do is that I go to review and then create. Okay. Now it tells you at the very start that there's some form of validation that's going on. And then once that validation is done, right, you can go ahead and then create. Now, of course, there are a lot of things, as I mentioned earlier, but you don't have to worry your head so much about all of those ones. So I can go to create, and then we have that created. So you notice at the top right that there's something being created. So let's wait for that to finish. Okay. So it's it's actually taking a while. So let's just wait for it to finish. Okay, right. So once it's done, right, we can go to our resource and then we take a look at that. Okay. So we come here and then we have our storage blob created, okay, or our storage account created for us. Now we can move on from there. So there's an overview of whatever is actually happening here. Now we can open in Explorer. See here. We'll just exit there. I want to. Okay, no worries. So I can open in Explorer. That's literally on my system. Okay, that's something you can have. And then now for what we are doing, right? When we come to the left side here, okay, there are quite a lot of things there. So in terms of the overview, the activity log, all of those, we have the containers available to us. All right, so here we have just logs, and then we have the file shares, queues, tables. Now, one thing you should note is that with the blob storage, you can store in literally all types of files in there. Okay, so there are quite a lot of options that are available. But what we are looking for is actually one that's down here. And see, we are looking for. Okay, yeah, we are looking for the static website, right? So that's what we are looking for. So we just come here, static website. Now, take note of when we came to the containers, right? Take note of the files that we have here. So we have $logs. Okay. Now, when we activate or we enable the option for the static website, well, that always gets missing from my face. Yeah. Okay. So that's what we have here. So when we activate the static website, it creates a new file for us. That's the web file. Okay. So now look at what it says. So enable a static website on the blob service allows you to host static web content. Okay. So take note. It's just what static web content that we are able to work with. Okay. So client-side scripts, server-side scripts, all of those things, and then it talks about them. So we can go ahead and then enable that. Now, the index document name. Now, when we were working with the GitHub pages, one of the things you were talking about was either to use the index.html or the main.html, right? Now, GitHub pages did not really allow us to, how do you call it? To experiment with that, okay? But here, with the Azure Blob Storage, we are able to actually do that, okay? So let's say for us, right, we want to have ours to be portfolio.html, all right? Now, if you want to have an error page, that's also something you can specify. So let's say you had an error page of 404.html, that could be part of your files as well. And then you can save that, okay? Now it says that it's actually updating that, and then that's that. Now, it tells us that what an Azure storage container has been created to host your your static website. Okay, now I spoke about we having an extra website for us. Okay, and that's what we have here. And then here you can see that what it says what the primary endpoint. Now the primary endpoint becomes what the address that's given us for that particular website that we are hosting. Okay, so even though we are hosting that, I said we are focusing on hosting, right? They tend to still give you a domain name which you can access those files from. Okay, now you notice that even though there's actually a domain name, it's pretty much difficult to even read at some point. So you can also go take a step further and then you create your own custom domain name or sign up for a custom domain name, and then you can point it to whichever one you're working with. All right. So let me just share that link here in the chat. I mean, once we get our stuff uploaded, we can take a look at that as well. Okay. All right. I was trying to access Hoven's site. All right, send me somewhere else. Okay. I think that works. Yep, Hoven's site also works. Yeah, that's good. Okay, that means you not set your index.html page, right? No worries. I mean, that's also good. Okay, so let's get back here. Sorry. Let's smile. Okay, so we are back here. Just close this one for now. Okay, so we can now go back to the web file. Let me try opening that particular site and let's see what we have stored in there. So when we open that, let's see what we have there. I'm not certain. Okay, yes. It tells us something that what the requested content does not exist. So literally there's nothing there for us to work with. Okay, so we can now go back to the web file. If you can see that, we can go back to the web file here. And then once we are there, okay, we can upload a file. Okay, so any file we want to upload, we can go ahead and then upload that. So let's see. I think we had portfolio.html as the root file or the default one, so we can just pick that. Let me pick the other ones too in addition. Let's just see. Okay, upload. Right. So all of these are uploaded, right? Let's try refreshing the page. Let's see. It's still giving us not found. Okay. Let's see. I think we are missing something. Okay. This side of things is done. Okay. So we have that done. I'm actually not certain what's missing here. For S3, we should have probably have allowed what's the name of that? We should have allowed access like public access and all, but for Azure we don't really need to do that. Okay. Web content not found. Let me try with the portfolio.html. Still okay. Yeah. So that actually shows. All right. Wait, that means that probably I did not name the destiny properly. Let me check out something. Just give me a second. Okay. But at this point, if anyone has a question, right, you can go ahead and then ask. Working their magic here. Okay. So you notice that this is the issue, right? I put it, the name I put out here is not the correct name. Okay, so I could just update that and then we're good to go. So these are some of the things, right? So even though I'm specifying the index file that I want to use, I have to make sure that what it's spelled out correctly so that anyone can be able to now access that. Okay, so you notice that after I'm done with that, and then I refresh that, it still brings us to what the portfolio.html file. Okay, so that's literally about that. So based on whatever we are doing, okay, or however you want to go about that, let's see if we can probably add the folders. I don't know. Let's see if we can add the folders. If we can add the folders, that would be good. At least we'll get to see everything. Let's see. Okay, we can't possibly upload the folders. Okay. So with that, maybe we could just, let's try something here. Okay. All right. So what we could do in that instance, right? As I said, so it means that you have to now make sure that your file structure is in tune or in line with all that you have here. Okay, so that at any point in time, if you actually now shift or drag yourself from that particular structure, you can still be able to have that. So just a linear structure where you have your CSS and then all those things literally at the same linear structure. That'll be pretty much simple to go. All right. But aside that, you could definitely look around to say creating your own file or your own folder at some point, and then it will be pretty much easy to go. All right. So that's that for the Azure Blob Storage. I mean, it doesn't really entail so much. The S3 also literally has the same approach to all of that. Okay, and that'll be that for what we have for today. I don't know if anyone has a question. Maybe we can just take a couple of questions and then we wrap it up for the day. All right. So any questions from anyone? If there's any question, maybe you can just put that in the chat. Okay. Any questions or comments or feedback? That would be very much appreciated. Okay. I don't suppose there's any of those. All right.